A $40 million nuclear bomber burns deep within the Arctic Circle. A landlocked energy fortress is breached thousands of kilometers away, and a ghost ship is hunted on the open sea, revealing how billions in defenses and vast distances were shockingly overcome. In the central Mediterranean, an 800-foot cargo vessel cuts through the pitch-black water. This is the Kandil, part of Russia's Shadow Fleet, a secret armada designed to move crude oil and bypass global sanctions. The fleet cost an estimated $10 billion to assemble and now generates roughly $100 billion in revenue for Moscow every single year. These are aging tankers with rusted hulls. Many turn off their transponders and sail without a flag or a name painted on the side. Russia desperately wants to keep these ships hidden, but how do you track and hit a target that has been scrubbed from every official map? Defense analysts suspect Ukraine utilized Western commercial satellite constellations to target the Kandil, employing Synthetic Aperture Radar, or SAR. You can turn off a ship's lights, or even its transponder, but you can't hide it from a microwave pulse. With SAR, satellites bounce radar waves off the ocean, while water scatters the signal into the open water. The vertical steel walls of a massive oil tanker act exactly like a mirror. To the satellite, the Kandil lit up like a lighthouse, making the ship easy to stalk. Somewhere out in the darkness, a small, civilian vessel paced the massive tanker, staying just outside visual range. This was a drone mothership, and on its deck, a team of specialized operators prepared an electric heavy-lift hexacopter. It's a modified piece of commercial technology that costs less than $20,000. While long-range drones use loud gasoline engines, this hexacopter is entirely electric, its rotors silent against the roar of the ocean wind. These electric drones trade fuel tanks for additional firepower, allowing them to carry a 9-kilogram warhead. It's the tactical equivalent of a $200,000 Javelin anti-tank missile, but for a fraction of the cost. The hexacopter lifted off the deck of the bobbing boat and into the sky. Flying directly at the tanker would trigger the ship's alarms, so the pilot had to exploit a geometrical blind spot. A massive tanker like the Kandil casts a radar shadow directly behind its own hull, but by approaching from the stern at a very low angle, small drones can remain hidden. Back on the mothership, the drone pilot watched as the ship's gray silhouette grew larger by the second on a grainy screen. As it got closer, with the electric whir of its rotors masked by the wind, the pilot began searching for his target. He maneuvered the drone vertically up over the stern, bypassing the hull and clearing the ship's railing. The pilot ignored the bridge and the living quarters. Instead, he centered his crosshairs on the manifold, the ship's most surgical point of failure, and pulled the trigger. The crew on the bridge would never have seen it coming. There was no roar of an incoming missile or scream of a fighter jet, just the sudden, terrifying sound of an explosion. The 9-kilogram warhead detonated directly on the manifold. Its shaped charge focused all its energy into a pointed jet of molten copper, capable of punching through solid steel. The blast caused significant damage, destroying vital equipment and instantly disabling the Kandil. The ship survived the hit, but it would need extensive repairs before it could rejoin the ranks of the Shadow Fleet. For the time being, it was little more than a 115,000-ton paperweight, a key component of a multi-billion-dollar logistics chain neutralized by a $20,000 drone. But the open ocean is completely defenseless. Hitting a landlocked fortress guarded by an electronic wall requires an entirely different mechanism. 2,000 kilometers east, deep in the heart of Eurasia, lies the Caspian Sea. This is Moscow's private lake, completely landlocked with no straits or hidden access points for submarines. Out on the water sit massive, multi-million-dollar offshore drilling platforms owned by the Russian energy giant Lukoil. These rigs are one of the keys to the Kremlin's war economy. They pump millions of tons of oil, generate billions of US dollars per year, and directly fuel the Russian military. With no naval access to the Caspian, Ukraine had no choice but to go through the sky. There was just one problem. A huge electronic wall stood in their way. Between the rigs and the Ukrainian border lay hundreds of kilometers of hostile airspace, filled with electronic warfare fields and long-range S-400 surface-to-air missile batteries, a single one of which costs more than $500 million. Navigating that gauntlet to hit a rig in a landlocked sea would take an entirely new strategy. Deep inside their own territory, Special Operations launched a coordinated swarm of deep-strike kamikaze drones. Unlike the silent electric hexacopter used in the Mediterranean, these were fixed-wing aircraft. Open-source intelligence strongly suggests they used the domestically built Lyuti, which translates to fierce, a fitting name. A single one of these drones costs roughly $200,000. It features a 6-7 meter wingspan and is powered by a loud gas engine. Made out of fiberglass, it has the radar signature of a large bird. Tucked inside its nose is a devastating 50-kilogram high-explosive warhead. But there was still the problem of the electronic wall. Russian electronic warfare is designed to scramble GPS signals and sever remote control links. If a standard drone flies into that airspace, its brain fries, it loses its coordinates, and it crashes. Ukrainian engineers bypassed the wall by doing the unthinkable. They removed the GPS entirely. To survive, drones like the Lyuti rely on an autonomous AI system known as machine vision. A camera in the nose looks at the ground and constantly compares the physical terrain to a preloaded, high-resolution 3D map on its hard drive. It navigates by recognizing the exact shape of roads, rivers, and mountains. Since it doesn't need an active satellite link, there's nothing to sever or lose connection. And, to avoid the radar nets, flight path reconstructions suggest these drones fly nap of the earth, hugging the terrain. They dip into river valleys and skim just 45 meters above the frozen treetops. By flying this low, they could slip right underneath the radar horizon of Russia's S-400 batteries. After hours of threading the needle through one of the tightest air defense nets on Earth, the drones finally reached the Caspian. Out on the open ocean, there are no river valleys or tree lines to hide behind. To avoid the final ring of coastal radar, the drones likely dropped their altitude, flying just a few dozen meters above the water. After kilometers of skimming the waves, their targets came into view. The Lukoil platforms operate around the clock. They're lit up with massive banks of industrial floodlights, and to the drones' optical sensors, they are impossible to miss. As the swarm closed the final distance, they broke formation. Individual drones peeled off, assigning themselves to 3 separate targets: the Filanovsky, the Korchagin, and the Grafer platforms. Inside the digital brain of the lead Lyuti drone, the mission shifted from navigation to its terminal attack phase. Flying at sea level, a fixed-wing drone can't just crash into the thick steel pylons of the rig's base. To maximize damage, it needs to strike the relatively soft, vital machinery on the top deck. Based on standard attack profiles, 2 kilometers out, the drone executed a pop-up maneuver. Its flight computer pitched the nose up, initiating a rapid climb. It cleared the height of the platform's towering superstructure, reached its apex, and immediately rolled into a steep dive. Evidence points to a surgical strike. The machine vision would have sorted through the complex geometry of the massive rig and locked dead onto the rig's operational lifeline: the gas turbines and power generators. Target acquired. Down on the deck, the night shift crew was completely blind to the threat. The final thing they heard was the sudden, angry whine of an approaching gas engine plunging out of the darkness. In the night vision footage later released by Ukrainian special forces, You can see the exact moment. From the drone's point of view, the steel grating of the turbine deck is perfectly centered in the crosshairs. It gets closer and closer until a sudden cut to static. It was a direct, simultaneous hit across all three platforms. When you hit an oil rig with high explosives, you expect a fireball and millions of liters of crude spilling into the water. But when defense analysts checked the satellite heat maps of the Caspian Sea the next morning, the area was completely clear. There were no thermal signatures or massive oil fires. The drones hadn't just crashed blindly. Equipped with terminal AI guidance, the optical sensors specifically avoided the highly pressurized flow valves at the wellhead, preventing an uncontrollable blowout. The fragmentation warheads shredded the machinery required to pump the oil without igniting the wells, crippling Russia's largest offshore fields and forcing them to instantly halt operations. The financial damage was immense, freezing a multi-billion-dollar facility and erasing millions in daily revenue that could no longer be used to continue funding the war. Conflict Theater reconstructs the mechanics of modern warfare using raw, open-source intelligence, providing the real truth instead of military fiction. The Caspian Sea strike did something worse than just hurt Russia financially. It caused psychological damage. In the age of cheap and autonomous drones, the massive physical footprint of the Russian Federation has become a critical liability. You simply cannot put a $500 million air defense system on every single oil rig, refinery, and airbase across 11 time zones. It seemed like machine vision AI was the ultimate weapon against Russia's geographical defense. It wasn't. To execute the most extreme attack yet, Ukraine didn't need a smarter drone. They needed a dumber one. 3,200 kilometers north, deep in the freezing expanse of the Arctic Circle, sits Olenya Air Base. Located on Russia's Kola Peninsula, it's home to Russia's massive fleet of two Tu-2M3 strategic bombers. These supersonic, nuclear-capable aircraft are valued at roughly $40 million apiece, and they form the backbone of Russia's long-range strike capabilities. Throughout the war, these bombers would take off from this Arctic sanctuary, fly south, and launch Kh-22 cruise missiles into Ukrainian cities. These are 5,440-kilogram supersonic carrier killer missiles, originally designed during the Cold War to sink American warships. Russia has repurposed them as terror weapons to level apartment buildings from hundreds of kilometers away. By firing from deep inside Russian airspace, the bombers never even have to cross the front line. Sitting over 1,770 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, the Kremlin assumed these assets were mathematically untouchable. To reach them, a weapon had to bypass Russia's billion-dollar radar nets. Then, it had to survive the Arctic. For a standard military drone, extreme cold is a death sentence. Ice accumulates on the composite wings, destroying aerodynamics and dragging the aircraft out of the sky. Even in the Arctic summer, flying an unmanned aircraft for as long and far as it would need to under those conditions is supposed to be impossible. So, how did Ukraine pull it off? While the exact launch method remains classified, aviation experts point to one likely culprit. It isn't a multi-million-dollar stealth drone. It's a hobby plane. The Aeropract A-22 Foxbat is an ultralight two-seater civilian sport aircraft built in Ukraine. You can buy one yourself, brand new, for roughly $90,000. It's made out of lightweight aluminum and canvas, with a top speed of barely 210 kilometers per hour, and it's meant for taking scenic flights on a Sunday afternoon. But Ukrainian engineers looked at this civilian aeronautic toy and realized it could become the ultimate long-range weapon. They gutted the cockpit, ripping out the passenger seats and the dashboard to shed weight. In their place, they strapped in custom-built auxiliary fuel tanks. This extended its range to nearly 3,200 kilometers. Next, they loaded the cabin with a high-explosive fragmentation warhead. Then they wired specialized robotic servos, essentially mechanical arms, directly to the plane's steering column and pedals. These used an earlier version of the autonomous machine vision AI later employed in the Caspian Sea, turning a manned civilian airplane into a slow-moving but unjammable cruise missile. So how does a slow, propeller-driven sports plane survive a multi-billion-dollar air defense network? The leading theory among defense analysts comes down to a radar flaw called the Doppler notch. To prevent radar screens from being cluttered by flocks of birds or highway traffic, the software automatically filters out objects moving below a certain speed threshold. By cruising at just 130 kilometers per hour, the A-22 fell perfectly into that blind spot. The Russian radar software actively filtered the physical plane out, dismissing it as background noise. To the radar operators, it would have just looked like a flock of birds or some anomalous weather. And because it was originally designed as a manned aircraft to carry the weight of 2 humans in rough weather, its oversized engine generated enough internal heat and mechanical thrust to survive the freezing Arctic air without icing over. For nearly 20 hours, Ukraine's Trojan horse droned slowly across the Russian sky. The plane didn't even have the cover of darkness. Flying during the Arctic summer, the drone was completely exposed under the light of the midnight Sunday. And yet, when it finally reached Olenya Air Base, the Russian defenders were caught entirely off guard. Air defense systems designed to shoot down million-dollar supersonic fighter jets didn't know how to react to a slow-moving civilian plane puttering over the tree line. Down below lay a sprawling expanse of concrete, and on it were the massive Tu-22 M3S. Measuring over 40 meters long, they don't fit inside standard reinforced bunkers, so they are parked out in the open, completely exposed to the sky. As the A-22 crossed the perimeter fence, its onboard AI woke up. Its optical camera scanned the ground below, ignoring the fake, 2-dimensional bomber silhouettes that the Russian military had painted on the tarmac as decoys. It hunted for a specific geometric shape until the autonomous optics locked onto the iconic swept-wing silhouette of a Tu-22 M3. Inside the gutted cockpit, the robotic servos violently pushed the steering yoke forward. The A-22 pitched down into a terminal dive. Down at the base, security finally realized what was happening, but it was too late to launch a surface-to-air missile. Impact. In a single stroke, a $90,000 modified sports plane critically damaged a $40 million strategic bomber. But the true financial cost to Russia is infinitely higher. The factories that built the Tu-22 M3 collapsed with the Soviet Union. Russia literally cannot build new ones. Every single bomber they lose is a permanent, irreplaceable loss to their nuclear triad. The physical size of Russia, the very thing that swallowed Napoleon's army, has become its greatest liability. Off-the-shelf engines and open-source code have fundamentally broken the map. Distance is dead.